The open world genre is one of the most popular video game genres today. Vast landscapes, interesting stories, and hundreds of hours worth of activities, including exploration, combat, and looting, await a new player eager to embark on a new adventure. In the open world genre, there is something for everyone, ranging from unlocking all your creative qualities in the procedurally generated worlds of Minecraft to ensuring survival in the dangerous and life-threatening world of Kenshi, to exploring a new and strange world filled with strange people, akin to the Elder Scrolls series. Since I discovered the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, I became a fan of a very specific type of role-playing game. I enjoy games that allow me to be good, evil, or anything in between. I love exploring a world that seems like it doesn't care if I exist within it. I also enjoy manipulating this world and its people to make my name heard as the hero of Kavach, the destroyer of Megaton, or the lone wanderer. But what happens if the illusion of choice becomes blatantly obvious? What if your character shifts from being a player's avatar to being a character of its own who evolves on their own without the player's control? And what happens if the remnants of the franchise's game design aspects snare and shackle the new and drastically different successor? Fallout 4 became an excellent case study on what can go wrong in a genre or focus shift. The Fallout game franchise is comprised of many entries by different development studios. The first and second games are spiritual successors to the game Wasteland and were developed by Black Isle Studios. Fallout set a new standard in the computer role-playing scene for being very open and allowing the player to get lost in the game world by interacting with NPCs and deciding what to do in any given situation. A third title was in the works, but was never finished due to monetary reasons. Bethesda, a company known for their open-world RPGs, bought the rights to Fallout and developed their own interpretation of Fallout that became tremendously popular and brought many new fans to this RPG franchise. Fallout 3 is both a step above and a bastardization of what Fallout was supposed to be. Complex and philosophical discussions and the absence of absolute good or evil was replaced by simple bad guys versus good guys conflicts, a simple, easy to digest but generic narrative involving a father-son character dynamic, and less topics that incite the player to think about the greater things in life. Not all things are bad though. Fallout 3 brought the franchise into a different genre. Instead of playing the game in an isometric perspective, the game is playable in the first or third person perspective. The game became much more engaging through real-time combat and freer exploration of the game world. You could also still decide what to do at every point in the game and theoretically had most of the freedoms that the early games possessed. But the lackluster writing hindered the game on becoming even greater than its predecessors. The next Fallout game, called Fallout New Vegas, is generally considered to be the best 3D Fallout game to date. It combines the best of the old and the new and features its own additions to the game design formula. Fallout New Vegas was developed by Obsidian, a company that was built by former Black Isle Studios developers. More meaning has been put into the world of Fallout New Vegas, and traits that made Fallout special back then have been reintroduced into this game's narrative. Absolute good or evil does not exist anymore. Decisions have consequences, and there are at least 4 ways of solving every quest. Fallout 4, developed by Bethesda again, is another reinvention of a franchise, but many consider that it isn't for the better. Fallout 4 stripped down most of the RPG mechanics that are present in every other Fallout game, including the skill system, karma system, reputation system, and meaningful decision-making. One of the most troublesome changes to the game design formula was the fact that this game features a voiced protagonist. Other things that change the gameplay for the worse are bound to the core gameplay mechanics of Fallout 4. The focus in gameplay shifted away from role-playing and was geared more towards action, looting, and exploration. Most of the gameplay consists of a player finding a new site, just to kill everything inside, and getting valuable resources from the remains of dead enemies, various containers, and things laying around the world openly. If a site was cleared, there isn't much more to do here, and the player just moves on to the next site to repeat the cycle. This cycle has been present in the previous Fallout titles too, but quite a few factors make this process less enjoyable and make the world seem unbelievable and absurd in the case of Fallout 4. Combat is one of the strongest aspects of Fallout 4, but simultaneously also what makes the game frustrating at times. Playing on a harder difficulty makes the game incredibly grindy and less rewarding due to the presence of many bullet-spongy enemies and a general lack of ammunition. The series on the whole has had some problems with balancing combat and health pools, but Fallout 4 is the worst case of bland combat in the entire series. Some NPCs won't die, even after a dozen headshots, surviving a couple fragmentation grenades, and even after the player unloads most of their ammunition into the target. On the easier difficulty settings, it gets less and less severe, but even on the normal difficulty setting, this situation will happen multiple times. What makes the situation worse is the presence of legendary enemies. If damaged enough, they might mutate into a stronger enemy, which means that they get an increased health pool, gain their entire hit points back, and you have to unload even more ammunition that you do not have into that single enemy again. Another problem is a lacking diversity of weapons. You always seem to find the same kind of weapons over and over again, some unmodified and many being modified variants of a specific weapon. There are also a plethora of special named weapons that either do way more damage or have specific special attributes attached to them. But in the end, they all do look the same. They all sound the same. There aren't enough differences there to give the player the illusion of a big weapon lineup. I am sure Fallout 4 features way more weapons than I think it does, but right now it feels like I always spot the same half dozen weapons over and over again. And that after playing the game for over 70 hours maybe. Aside from these problems, the combat has seen many improvements. NPCs now take cover. Shooting feels much more responsive. The combat also looks and feels better the majority of the time. When everything works, the combat in this game feels great. Other additions and enhancements regarding the game design are the crafting and base building systems. When running and gunning throughout the world, you amass a quantity of many different weapons, armor, and junk items. Now the junk you find laying around the world actually offers value to the player. Every item can be recycled and used for building structures, crafting weapons, and even setting up appliances and weaponry that functions autonomously. It is a nice change of pace and is partly a reason why Fallout 4 has quite a bit of entertainment value, even with my laments regarding the narrative and combat in the game. Sadly, there are some missed opportunities here. I would have loved to see an actual use in the settlements you build. Maybe I am expecting too much of a mindless open world shooter, but I think that I would appreciate settlements much more if they produced resources the player could see some use for. Yes, the player is able to build various machines that he can use to produce ammunition, Nuka-Colas and weaponry, but I would love to design a settlement that produces various resources independent of a player's input. Without such a benefit, the settlement system feels a bit incomplete and can get very boring very quickly. The resources can also be extremely limited for bigger builds, thus many resort to game exploits like multiplication glitches or cheating to gather a massive quantity of resources. The crafting system has been expanded and simplified. Instead of seeking out weapon mods that you can attach to your weapon, like in Fallout New Vegas, your crafting skills are dependent on a perk you can level up multiple times. You do not even need any mods, just raw crafting materials that are present in a player's workshop. Crafting stays relevant at all times of the game due to enemies becoming stronger and stronger throughout the game, but that doesn't mean that the system doesn't have any issues. While crafting is fun and rather useful at times, you always end up crafting the same things. The stronger weapon modifications are located lower in the lists, and there aren't any options that drastically alter a function of a weapon. You can repurpose any weapon into a short-range, mid-range or long-range weapon, but you can't create any more exotic weapons that could alter the way you play the game. I would have liked to see ricocheting bullets, bouncing grenades, in general, many gimmicks. How about a rocket launcher launching rolling grenades that roll towards a target and explode on impact? What about a weapon that has extreme recoil and very slow reload times, but an incredibly high damage output? What if some weapon mods are incompatible with each other and the player crafts hilariously bad weapons that have little use on accident? Many interesting things could have been achieved with this system, yet Bethesda decided to play it safe. It also is a shame that the repair mechanics the older games possessed have been thrown out. It would have been interesting to see how you could harvest weapon parts of collected weapons, and it would have reintroduced more complexity into the combat. In my experience, it always was the same in the end. The crafting system always fell kind of in the background. I never really used it at some point because I noticed that it's kind of unnecessary. The Commonwealth is filled with people and things to do. This should normally be a good thing, but there are some issues. In the predecessors, there are many NPCs that issue noteworthy information and also missions that do not directly have anything to do with the main questline of the game. These attributes are still present in Fallout 4, but have been toned down drastically. It seems like most NPCs do not have many interesting things to say. Rarely I find an NPC which I am genuinely interested in Fallout 4. NPCs have become a bit less interactive too, due to the simplified dialogue system that was implemented in the game. Many times you cannot explore everything a character has to say, and if they are quest givers, you can only accept the quest, be sarcastic but still accept the quest, negotiate for better rewards and also accept the quest, or say no, which just delays the quest for later. To make things worse, quite a few characters issue generated quests, which make you do a single activity over and over again, or fetch some items here and there. The first time you do embark on a quest like that, you might not notice at first that this is a generated quest that you can do over and over again, but once you find out, it is incredibly frustrating. Generally, you know that a quest is generated if the NPC giving you the quest doesn't specify anything like a location or what exactly you have to do. Mostly they will say something like, "I marked the place on your map." Sometimes a possible side story is laid out very well, but the player can't interact with the characters in a way they want. One time I met a drug addict and his twin sister who was supplying him with drugs. Apparently you can only advance the quest when you buy drugs off the addict and show it to someone, but I did not want to buy any drugs off him since I never used them. So I thought that this narrative was leading nowhere. Another horrible quest in the same vault is the one where the sole survivor has to search a cat that escaped the vault and bring it back. Many times picking a good response is also either impossible or has been made a bit more difficult. In the older games, this problem also sometimes appears here and there, where every dialogue option sounds really bad, but in Fallout 4, this happens way more than just a few times. The other big problem here, which I alluded to multiple times, is bad writing. This may actually be the biggest problem regarding Fallout 4. The setup of a story with your husband or wife getting shot and the abduction of your son is not set up in the best way. I believe that a player might get fully immersed into the narrative if they themselves are a parent, but for me personally, the beginning of the game couldn't make me care enough for the main character's struggle. Not enough time is spent with the protagonist's family to properly establish a bond with the player. About 10 or 15 minutes after starting the game, the son, Sean, already gets abducted. While it would have been much more dramatic and significant if that happened later in the game, or not at all. Throughout the game, the protagonist puts a lot of emotion and desperation into a search for Sean, while the actual player does not care. To negate this flaw, I tend to disregard the narrative of Fallout 4 completely, which disconnects me entirely from the main protagonist of the game. And yeah, I never played through the main quest line of Fallout 4. I know how it progresses, I know how it turns out, I know how it ends, but I do not care. Another bad thing is the lack of choice, which I alluded to multiple times again. It is impossible to be a bad guy in Fallout 4, and considering that so many people complain about this point, it seems to be one of the main aspects of Fallout that fans expect in a Fallout title. Those questionable design decisions conglomerate into an absurd experience. Even if you completely disregard the narrative of the game, the grindy combat and repetitive cycle of exploration, combat and looting can quickly get stale. Most NPCs are either unresponsive, or if they do interact with the player, they do not have much interesting things to tell the player. And what for some people is even more severe is the fact that in a harsh and ugly world, the player most of the times isn't able to become an antagonist in the world. Fallout 4 would have been much better off if it almost completely removed the role-playing and focused more on shooting, base building and exploration. The influence and reputation of the earlier games in the series hinder the game from excelling, but not only for players that already are aware of the Fallout series, but also for some casual players that at some point will notice the general faults the game design has on offer. Genre shifts or focus shifts are always cases of compromise. You take mechanics away and introduce new mechanics that should aid the new type of experience that you want to build. But if you try to please everyone and accidentally let the mechanics work against the overall experience, you ironically make the game less appealing and less enjoyable for a big portion of a player base. Many people say that Fallout 4 is a good game, but not a good Fallout game. I wholeheartedly disagree. Fallout 4 on its own doesn't manage to rise above mediocrity, since there are too many issues, far more than I want to cover in this video, that bring this game down. But this game is fun to play if the qualities of it shine through. Those qualities being the combat, the overtly simple but fun base building, and mindless looting. Sadly, the game is held back by not only its narrative or general design mistakes in combat, exploration and communication, but by leaving in remnants of a design formula that does not work with the current design of Fallout 4. All those mistakes and oversights in design result in an absurd experience, taking place in a world the player can't take all that seriously anymore. A world that seems familiar, mechanics that are alien to what the game was supposed to be, and also the marketing that was done for Fallout 4 sold the game for something that it is not. Bethesda should focus on what they can do best, and they should not try to please absolutely everybody.